Hello, my name is Jenna Blumenfeld. I'm the product content strategist here at Stream, and I'm so happy to have Ben Golden, the product manager at Stream as well, joining us. So Ben, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
So to start, I'd love to kind of just have the cliff notes of your career. If you could describe your path from software engineer to product manager, that would be great.
Yeah, sure, no problem. So I started even before I started my career, I started my education with a degree in computer science from the University of Colorado in Boulder. I knew I wanted to work in tech, but didn't really expect to be happy writing code for 8 hours a day. But at that point in time, like product management wasn't as prolific as a profession as it is today. So I really didn't know it existed. So I really expected to land in like engineering management or some sort of training or sales engineer role or something like that. But definitely wanted to kind of do my time as a frontline engineer as well. So I went through my program at CU and then joined a startup at the time called SendGrid. It's a very small company. I think we were about 20 people when I started. And I actually did support with the company for the first 3 months that I worked there because they were just like being slammed under like kind of support ticket loads and stuff, which was actually a great way to transition from the world of academia to the world of like actual tech companies. There's a lot of stuff about like how the software world works that isn't super apparent in coursework. So it's really helpful to be able to kind of like learn by like helping customers debug their problems and like get a strong understanding of the product. But anyway, I did that for a little while and then moved into software development. And worked first on a PHP stack and then working on a Ruby on Rails app, a couple different Ruby on Rails apps. Mostly building tools for the support team that I had previously worked on, administration dashboards, ticketing, all that sort of stuff. And then, did that for a while and actually moved into an engineering management role and was working closely with the product manager for a while. And then she left. We hired someone to replace her, but she, the new guy who took her spot, like, didn't really have much idea what was going on, being only like a weekend. So my boss actually asked me if I could kind of lean into the product side of things since I've been, as an engineering manager, been working closely with the product team. So I did that kind of an interim capacity for a little while, realized I actually really liked product management. And so applied for a full-time position still at SendGrid as a product manager, made that full-time switch and like haven't really looked back. I've loved the product side of things.
That's great. So what surprised you most about becoming a product manager when you first stepped into that role?
Um, I think one of the things that stands out in my memory is like how important it is and actually how hard it is to stop having an opinion about how to build things. Product management, like so much of what you're doing is trying to understand what customers need and thus what you should build. But then like how you should build is really the domain of engineering, like how to architect systems and like, how databases should be redundant or like what services will talk to each other and what protocols are going to use and all this sort of stuff. And as a former engineer and engineering manager who'd been doing a lot of architecting of systems, I had lots of opinions about those things, but quickly learned how kind of unhealthy it is for me as a product manager to tell a bunch of engineers how they should go build something, and had to kind of rein that in and learn to keep my mouth shut.
Yeah, for sure. That does seem like a challenge. So when you stepped into this new role, and maybe in your current role, what skills are the most important to be a successful product manager?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly many, but the top of my list is certainly just talking to customers. Like that is so much of what we do, and ultimately the real value of having a product team is understanding what customers want, and more importantly than what they want. Like anybody can like, hear feature requests and write them down and parrot them to engineering, but really the important part is understanding why they want them. What it means to their business, how important it is, how they would use it. All of those sorts of why and how questions are super important for prioritization, like knowing which things to work on first, because customers may, say something on the surface that a feature is really important to them, that they really want it. But if you dig a little further, you realize that like it's not as critical to their business as maybe something else they haven't mentioned that you're also working on. So that kind of understanding is huge, and you really can't get it unless you're just good at having those conversations with customers, making them feel at ease, having the kind of politeness and decorum to like have solid conversations there. And then also, like once you've kind of learned all that from customers, you really have to use basically the same skill set within the company with stakeholders as well as engineering teams to make sure they understand that same why, that those same kind of answers to how and all those sorts of things, so that you actually build the thing that's actually going to solve the problem for customers.
And so how do you formulate questions to really get at the root of what customers or potential customers, what they're really trying to say?
Yeah, great question. I think one thing that I learned a couple years into my career that's been like super critical to how I approach that is that it helps immensely to kind of like disentangle what it is that you want to know or that the business wants to know from the questions that you'll actually ask the customers. So I always start by making a list of like, here's the things that we want to know. So for example, like, will customers use some feature that we're coming up with, right? Obviously, the best way to ask a customer that question is not necessarily, will you use this, right? Like they might say yes, and that might not actually be the case once it's actually released. So you have to be a little bit more creative in how you think about how to ask customers questions. For example, like there's a great practice that I commonly use when trying to evaluate how much people are willing to pay, which is to like give them a list of features and give them 10 like coins and tell them to assign the coins to the various features. They can put more than one coin on more than one feature, and like that you never kind of, I would at least would never kind of come to some sort of kind of creative solution for how to talk to customers about what they want like that if I hadn't first separated out what it is that I'm trying to understand and get clear about that for myself first. So I always kind of I call them a test plan and then an interview script. So first build a test plan that's just like, okay, what do we really need to know? And then cool, now I'm going to take that and translate that into an actual interview script of like, what will I actually ask?
Yeah, I love that. It's almost like gamifying it for the interviewee. That's really
cool. Yeah.
So would you say that your past as a software engineer is super helpful in your current position? Is this kind of a natural flow that many engineers would be successful at as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, for me at least, it's product management was a really nice kind of fusion of two areas of experience that I had. One on the engineering side, and also, like I mentioned, when I started at SendGrid, I did support for a little while. And I also spent about a year and a half in college working for an internet service provider doing phone tech support as well. So like the marrying of that customer support experience with engineering is really perfect for product. And that's, like one of the things when I'm hiring that I tend to look for is like people that have had strong exposure to customers as well as have some technical experience or like working with development teams experience. So I mean, I think engineering is definitely extremely valuable, like being able to understand how systems work and like what some of the constraints are, even at a high level of what developers do and how they're building things, is just super helpful to like follow conversations and have discussions about estimates and priority and all those sorts of things. Extremely valuable. But I think any engineer who's considering a move in a product, the other thing you have to ask yourself is like, will I enjoy talking to customers all the time? Because that is a huge part of it.
For an engineer who maybe doesn't have that really deep customer focused experience, like what's the first step in kind of getting that piece of the puzzle?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so I think there's so many different ways to do it, but all of which are valid. But I think like a few that come to mind is like, so one thing that's kind of exploded on the development side of the world is GitHub, extremely popular tool, like where almost all of the code is stored these days. And GitHub has, this feature of issues, where people can like submit issues to a repository and say like, oh, I have this problem or that problem. Being like really engaged with customers, or not even customers, just like other developers that are maybe using an open source library that you maintain or, that you work on, things like that are great opportunities to kind of flex those skills. It doesn't necessarily, talking to customers doesn't necessarily mean actually talking, right? Like it can be digital, like communication over Slack or over GitHub messages, all that sort of stuff is super valuable too. So like that's a great avenue. I think also, support, one of the nice things about support and engineering in almost all organizations is that a lot of people in support are like, especially at technology companies, are like fairly technical and have to be fairly technical to do their jobs, and so are interested in learning more about what engineers do. So there's like lots of great opportunities for like engineers to volunteer their time to work with the support team to like, help them learn concepts or solve hard tickets. That also gives that engineer an opportunity to kind of, flex their customer skills as well.
Awesome. Those are great tips. I love those. So I'd love to get kind of real about the details of what it's like to be a product engineer on a day-to-day basis. So could you describe some of the highs of being a product engineer or a product manager, and also some of the lows, like what keeps you up at night?
Sure. Yeah. When I was in school, I always used to joke to people that asked about programming as profession or as a study in school, that like programmers are really just like druggies of another vein. That it's like, we kind of go through this whole experience of like writing a bunch of code that then doesn't work and you don't know why, and you like struggle to figure it out, and it's very frustrating, and then you finally do and suddenly it works, or your test pass or whatever it is, and you get this like massive dopamine hit of just like excitement and happiness. And I think product managers are really similar. It's just that like the mechanism that delivers that dopamine is slightly different. Rather than getting your code working or your test passing, it's really like shipping features, like seeing customers use the things that you work so hard to understand needed to be built, or how they needed to be built, or whatever the case might be. Once you actually like ship that feature and see customers using it, it's like very exciting and very invigorating. I've like had the pleasure of shipping many a feature that have caused that kind of elation. On the flip side, kind of the hard parts is, I think it's one of the hardest things about being a product manager is that you have to say no so much. The very nature of prioritization is that you have to pick the most important thing to do and do that. And because you're listening to customers all the time, because you're listening to stakeholders all the time, because you're getting all this input from all these places about things you could do, there is by definition a ton of things you won't do, or at least you won't do for a long time, and more things will arise that you also won't do for a long time. So there's always just this big pile of things that are very interesting, that are very cool, that you would love to be building, that you don't have time for. And that is probably, for me at least, one of the hardest things to still like have a smile about. It's just painful sometimes to like kill your darlings and not ship these features.
Yes, I understand that for sure. So a lot of folks who are successful in their job, as I would say you are, they can attribute that to a great mentor. So did you have a mentor to get to where you are now? And also, do you have any advice for people on how to find that great mentor?
Yeah, absolutely. I've had many great role models and mentors, but like the person who sticks out to me the most, it was my last boss at SendGrid before I left. Well, actually, I guess at Twilio as well. We worked together at SendGrid and then were acquired by Twilio. So left Twilio with her as my boss, and her name's Jennifer Kessler, and she's director of product management, or was director of product management above me at the time. She also started her own company called Busy that was then acquired by SendGrid, and then she joined our product team. And it's just like, she was such a huge asset to me in terms of learning how to really like be organized and like make sense of very cluttered, very complex communication problems. It's one thing to manage a single product team. It gets a lot harder when you have get to larger scales and you have many different teams all trying to work together to build one thing, trying to communicate with each other, trying to understand how these pieces fit together, all that sort of stuff. So, kind of creating clarity through organized information, even say in a presentation or a spreadsheet or in other software tools, is so incredibly valuable. And it's one of those things that, especially for me coming from an engineering background, like felt kind of like tedious or like somewhat busy work, or not that important to me, because I was just so used to code and kind of like making things work. Documents seemed very mundane, but it actually, like, I really learned through her guidance that like that kind of stuff matters far more probably than any sort of like munging of data or like database querying or even like writing of code, because it's like by creating that clarity, you're allowing like tons and tons of people, 40, 50 people to all work together, row in the same direction. And that's really like priceless. Like the force multiplier of like being on the same page at that scale is like huge.
Yeah, awesome. Advice. What advice do you have for folks who want to get into product management?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I would say is like look for opportunities to work with customers. When I took my first job at SendGrid, I almost didn't actually. I was like reluctant to, because I didn't really want to do support. I was really eager to write software, but ultimately decided to do that. And like in hindsight, that was like one of the best decisions I ever made. That opportunity to get to work in support at a growing company, as someone who can then, kind of climb into different roles as the company grows and there's more opportunities. Like I wouldn't trade my time in customer support for anything. It's so incredibly valuable. So like, if you're an engineer coming out of college who wants to go into product management, take a job in support. I think it'll be extremely valuable, especially if it's at a growing company. You can easily springboard from there into a product management role. I think even for established engineers, if you can find an opportunity to maybe like go into a support role, take a pay cut for a little while, I think it'll like really improve your long-term career aspirations if you're headed down a product management route as well.
Great. That's great advice. And finally, what are you most excited about in your new role here at Stream?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think probably the top of the list has to just be the product in general. I think like we talked about earlier, that is ultimately the thing that drives most, if not all, product managers. So it's like very exciting to be working on a product that has so much opportunity to be so important in kind of the digital communication world. There's lots of very interesting features. I've been working on our moderation tool set and building machine learning models that can predict how likely a message is to be spam or kind of toxic, these sorts of things, like those sorts of features that will like solve some of the problems that we are just now facing as we kind of do this technological evolution as a society are really exciting and really interesting. I think in addition to that, I'm just really excited to grow the team. It's really fun to work with new and different people and like, learn from other people's like diverse experiences and skill sets and all that sort of stuff. So I'm really looking forward to that as well.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to that too. Well, thanks again for joining us. For those watching this video, head to getstream.io to check out our product, and thanks again.